So, hi everybody and welcome back to this Unreal Engine 5 tutorial series for absolute beginners. This is video 98 and in this video we are talking about creating a player controller. We already talked in our last video about the input and the input for the first person character, and we learned also that this input for the first person character is more or less universal. What I mean with that is we can reuse it in many other projects as well. So not only for character, for pawns, and many other things. And these are really the base inputs. For example, move forward, backwards, and then only the action mapping are a little bit different most time. For example, you don't need a shot button for all games and something like that. So, and all this kind of stuff was in our player character, and here we are transferring actually all this code what we have here to the player controller. So let's get started. Let's create a player controller. And the question is, before we create it, why we should create a player controller? Because in this project we have all the inputs for our character. We have all the inputs in our character, yes, in the blueprint of our character. So why we have to create now a special separate class, which is the player controller class? And there are different reasons. For example, if you want to make a multiplayer, then you need a player controller, because the multiplayer, they have different controller IDs, and then if your character is that means not that your player controller will be destroyed. That means only that the character is destroyed, and you can later get assigned a new pawn with your controller. And there are many other reasons too. So you can read this on the documentation, but most time they say for multiplayer. And they say that for a single player, for example, it's not so important. So you can keep all the inputs in your character. But we learn today creating a player controller, because when we go here to the world settings, and here we set the game mode, and then you see here we have our default pawn class, the HUD class, and here is the player controller class. And this player controller is a default class which is doing actually nothing, I think. It's not really doing anything here, and we will create now our own one and then put it exactly to this place here. So let's get started. First of all, I open up here this first person folder. I think I keep in blueprints. And here I then right click, go to the blueprint class, click here, and here in common we already see a section which says player controller, and we click on it. And I call this PC for player controller underscore and my created controller, my created player controller. It's a long name, but it's okay for this thing. You can think a name which is a little bit shorter, but that's okay. So now I have created it, and we see in the viewport we make actually nothing, because the player controller need only inputs for what we want control, because the player controller want control something, and in our case it's a character, but the player controller can control all other things as well. For example, we learned a little bit about the player controller in AI, because an AI need also a player controller, and here we make a player controller for the character. So we have now created this player controller, and now actually we need here all this thing here what we have in our player controller. You can go there, and one way to do this is you just delete here all and make it from scratch. But I said this one is universal, what they set up, which means you don't have to, you just use that what they made, because this is so like a template in the sense of you can use it, reuse it, at all time you reuse it and change it. And this one we are going to do, which means we are just using this code here already too, which means I can just copy this one. This is the easiest way probably. You just press here Control C for copy. Then you switch over to your player controller, Control V to paste, and then you have all the code. But now look what happens when you press compile, and you get here a massive list of errors. But these errors are only here because we have now created a separate class, which means we have no more access of this self node, for example. This blue things, this blue nodes here are errors because here is all time a self reference, which is not working anymore because self in our character was our character blueprint. So it was referring to the character here, to the blueprint for the character, and that's not working. That is one reason why we have here so many errors. But there is one more error here. They created some variables which are just floats, so you have just to recreate this one here. So here in this case you create a variable float and then write here default values for some. And which error you have to here, let's see, this one is something what I made that's not so important at all. Here you have this one, we can just delete at all. And input action play sound on right click. That is not error, that's okay. Let's see. And this one is the dispatcher, okay. This one we have no dispatcher here. Then you have create a dispatcher as well here, or perhaps solve this one in another way. So you see there are many errors, and this is one way to solve it. And the other way is, for example, you just say, wait a minute, we have here so many settings, I don't need most. Let's say in my player controller I want just walk in front, back, and left, right, and perhaps mouse lookup, which means I need this axis here, only this move forward, and I kick out, for example, let's see, this is 4, up, down, that's okay. Move right, left, that's okay. Turn right, left, move right, left is okay, but turn, I don't need to turn, let's kick it. And then turn right, left mouse, yes, let's keep this one. This look up rate with gamepad, no. And look up, down mouse, yes, that we keep as well, perhaps. And here on this one, let's say jump, yes, I need perhaps jump. Play sound, I don't need this play sound here, this is this one. And you say perhaps you need only now this little version here, so you see. And with that made, we can of course compile again, and we get now some warnings, and the warnings are, which means we just delete it, which means we can just get rid of some sections here at all. So now we have some less errors. And with that said, you have to solve these errors now here, which are a little bit less than before, but still, you see this is the self here. And how we solve this self here fast? I show you this one very fast. You go here and create just references. Most time it's all time reference problem, and you know we already talked about references. One easy way is begin play, and then you create just the references which are missing. For example, this self here is we need a reference for this character. All right, let's create it. Get player character, and then promote this one to variable, and right here perhaps ref and underscore player character. Ref means just reference, so I know it's a reference for the player character. And then we have this, we compile save, and now we can of course put this reference in here, get, and then connect this one to this target itself. And we solved that very easy here. And the same goes for the other places too. Who needs a self-reference for a character? That was a pawn reference, but let's see if this is working. Let's hope it's working. If not, I have probably changed something. So, and if I compile, let's see how many arrows. Yes, you see the arrows here on top are gone. That's interesting and fine. And what I want to show, so we created a reference. Of course, you can make here another way of reference. We learned this tool. You can use a function library because player character and what was it? Game mode and probably some other mores are all time used. So you make a function library and then just call the function library here. Then you would not even create this one, and then you can all time use the function library and then promote this one to a variable and then make this one here as well. But this one is the standard way. Function library is probably the more convenient way. And here we have one more thing. This one I won't skip now because this one means we have to create a dispatcher. I skip this because you know how to create dispatcher. This part we have already, I made already about a video about this, and this one is the same thing, just with the touch input. But a touch input I'm not using at all, so I would even kick this out to make the code a little bit less. And I'm almost finished. And now I show you something very interesting, which is using a little bit the editor a little bit better. What I mean with that, let's write here begin play here a comment for this one here on top, because this one is just commenting and making it more visible. So, and right now I say I want deselect this section, right? What you normally do is clicking here and then we compile, and that is more or less deselected now. Very easy way, and it's almost good and fine. But you can deselect actually sections another way too, which is what you would do in programming, in text programming. And here's a similar way, like it's like commenting out this section. So you are selecting a portion and say disable this selection here, for example. And now this is possible in the editor too, and we learn a little bit about the editor preference, which you can find here in edit. You go here in edit. We many times talked about this project settings. Now let's talk about this editor preference. Editor preference means you are setting it up so how you like it, and that means you try to make it as comfortable and as best as possible for your own needs. And here I want to show you now one thing which is really handy for blueprinting. Probably you know it. If not, then you learn it. You can write here on top disable. And when you write, for example, disable, we have here general keyboard shortcuts. And before we go to the keyboard shortcuts, I should show you the normal place, which is actually in the normal place. How you can disable and enable nodes is actually here in Blueprint Editor settings. Here on general, here the third row, you click on this one, and then you go here down where it says experimental, and then you go and click here which says allow explicit what's right there, explicit in pure node, this one here, and you tick on it. And if you tick on it, then you can something do like let me show you this, not here, we go to our player controller, which looks a little bit like this one, very simple compared to the other. And now you can select this node, right click on this node, and then you have this option section here in the middle, which is new. And here it says disable, do not compile. And now you see this one is disabled. You can right click on it and go to enable, and enable always means it is available, but then enable only for developer only, which means if you make this one, careful, make not this mistake. Developer only means if this will work in your development, which means here while we are coding it, we are editing it and so on, but this node will not work when you release it. So change this definitely to enable always, and you see it says no development here, right? That's very important when you do this one, because this one can cause problems if you activate this one only for development only. All right, so that's very important. And yeah, this is very handy because now I can select, if I said, hey, let's deselect the whole code here, instead of going one by one and deselecting all, I can right click and say here disable, and now I disable the whole part here. That's very handy. That's they are doing this in programming with commenting, uncommenting a section, and here in visual in this visual scripting you can do it this way, which is very nice as well. And then you can select all, again right click, and oops, here right click, and then go here to enable, and don't go to development. That's very important that you make not this mistake here, because make always, this is the normal section. So, and one more thing here before we continue, of course you can set up shortcuts too, and if you want to get really good, most time you will set up shortcuts. For in editor preference is also good, or the project settings is also good for shortcuts. And in editor preference you can write, for example, disable, and now the same thing what we made with right click. Here is a section which says general keyboard shortcuts, and here we go to this line here which says disable nodes, and in my case you can choose here whatever you did. I set up Control K for a shortcut, so when I press Control K it will disable, but don't forget you have set it up perhaps for enable as well. Then you write enable on top, then you scroll down a little bit and you can see here general keyboard shortcuts for enabling, and here it is the section for enable nodes always. Of course you have here enable for the development, and I only set up for always because I want most time it not for development. I don't care really about development because later I know it, but of course you have this option as well. It comes handy in certain situations, and yeah, but I make always, and then I set it to Control U. And if you have this shortcut, then you can go here, and with shortcuts of course it's fast. I press now the shortcut which is Control K, and I deselected instantly all things, and then I say, oh wait a minute, I wanted only deselect this one or not this one. Then I just select the other parts here, and then I enable it, Control in my case U, and you see it's activated. That's very handy, that's very powerful. And now this one is deselected, which means I can compile and all the errors are gone because the other parts are okay. But this one is deselected. This one would still make a compile error, but this works now, and we can almost test our player controller now. But we have to one more step, and this one more step is of course using our player controller. For example, here in the world settings, when we go down to the player controller class, it is still using this player controller, and I want that it's use my, so I select my, of course, and my was this PC, my player controller. No, that was it not. My was PC, my created player controller. Uh, yes, I think this one is the one which I created. I'm a little bit irritated why the symbol is here a little bit different. I hope I made all right. Because this one is my Ludwig class player controller. Yes. The parent class player controller. Alright. I think it's right. Alright. So with that said, we tested. So now I can do almost all things here. I'm not sure if this is right. And let's see if this is right. So you see, I'm using now my player controller and I can do almost all things, and I think that's not right. It can't be. Normally I should not be able to shot. And the reason for that is, of course, I made here a mistake. And can you see the mistake? It's very easy. I still have the whole code here in my character. You can delete it, or what I'm going to do right now is just disable it. What we learned, right? I press Control Command and all are disabled here. And now all the setting what we have here is disabled. I press Compile Save, and now I press, and now this one is only using my player controller, and my player controller can't shot. I press the shot button, I can't use it. That's the player controller which I set up. And you see, it makes almost all the same things, but it's much more little, because I said I just need these functions here. And the shot function, yes, I must get rid of the arrows here, which mostly means again a reference here, and then yeah, perhaps I can make this fast. Perhaps not. Control uncontrol it, compile it, and you see it says here also a reference to cell. Probably I can, but perhaps not. But let's see. I just get this one player character. Yes. Insert. So it says it's not. I need to create again. Yes, whatever. All right. With that said, here we have to create another reference. And I skipped this section out, creating again a reference. And so because the video is too long, I think you get the have an understanding about this one. And with that said, we know now how to create a player controller. You just create this class, you set up this one, and perhaps one more info that's very handy. I said this in project settings, and when we go down to this inputs again, where we are and where we have this action mapping and this axis mapping, and you see I messed up here hard, right? So this is not really the default settings, and perhaps you need the default settings again. Here on the right side on top you can see export and import. What you can do, I said this one is universal. Most time you can at start, for example, you create a first person shooter game and then export it here on a file, and then you change here, and when you mess it up like me, then you press here this import and import it from a file, and all the basic settings are again here. That's a very handy way to get this back. For example, in my case, I have not created this export file, which means I can now go to my launcher, create a new first person template, and then I go here to the input section, and then I press there export, and that will create a file. Then I close it and come back to this project here, and here I press import, because then I have the file, and then when it's imported all the settings are back to the defaults. That's why I said it's very important that we know this one here, it's universal, and we can all time get rid of it, extend it, and import it back. In my case, I will probably import this back because I kicked out now many other things. Perhaps I need them. For example, I have kicked here out all the controller settings, the second ones, because now I have only mouse and keyboard but no controller, which is sometimes very handy. And many want play on PC with controller too. And yeah, I will probably bring it back. And that's very important that you know this as well. So the player controller is set up. We can use this player controller. And with that said, I stop this video here. And if you have any questions or any complaints, like all times, write it in the comments. And good luck and bye.